No amendment from us, you'll all be glad to hear, and probably not too much of a long speech either. Just a few notes, I guess, and reflections on the contents of the budget and the prospects for the finances of the local authority going forward. Firstly, we just wanted to pick up on the information that was contained with regards to the budget consultation that's taken place. I think really interesting to note those priorities that were picked out by members of the public who engaged in that process, and just how much of a really high priority they placed on, in particular, on health and social care, and also community safety issues also right up there. Very much reflections of what we're hearing on the ground as the top priorities for our residents in Charles Dickens ward and indeed across the city. As you know, we, and kind of in particular Councillor Mellor, does a lot of campaigning and spends a lot of time campaigning on issues around community safety, in particular violence against women and girls. So really important to kind of emphasise that that is also a priority of residents and something we must all ensure that we're working towards eliminating as much as possible. Just moving on to the contents of the budget papers today, starting off with the capital programme. A few things, I guess, just to highlight and reflect on before we kind of proceed to hear the rest of the debate and indeed vote on the budget as a whole. Firstly, as has already been noted, I think we do need to look at what's happening with the Bransby Park leisure centre proposals. I mean, it seems that politically there's probably kind of consensus now that will happen, but I still think that we need to, as councillors, and indeed those of us who are backbench councillors, play a role there in kind of assurance and scrutiny around ensuring that we are getting value for money and that those costs are being controlled. Because we know that over the course of this project, in fact, I think Councillor Beauchamp will correct you, because I think the original figure that we had before us in terms of full council wasn't £17 million, it was £12.5 million. And it's now gone up, obviously, quite considerably, some 70%, just shy of 70%. Now, I know inflation is high, I know construction costs are going up, and it may well be that that does represent value for money, and that is what a new leisure centre costs in this day and age. But I just think that we need to provide that scrutiny and to get that really assurance from the administration that what is currently proposed, the level of funding that is currently being drawn on from council reserves, is an appropriate use of council resources, does represent value for money. And I think also what I would like to see is an assurance around the level of risk around those financial forecasts, because in the last couple of budgets we've been told this is how much Bransby Leisure Centre will cost. Next year we're back another couple of million. Next year we're back, I think this year, another 5 million. So will we be in the same position this time next year, asking for more draw on council resources for something which we had hoped had already been resolved in previous years? So yeah, I guess really a request for kind of that assurance around those figures. Moving on, I did want to talk a little bit about the information that's contained in here with regards to, well, I think there's two issues here. The one is the homeless day service, and one is the new hub for housing options as it used to be known. Firstly, the Housing Options Hub, I think there will be no qualms for me on that. I think anyone who has visited Housing Options, as I will continue to call it, because I think H&S is confusing and lots of people know it by Housing Options still, so I will continue to use that name, apologies. Anyone who has visited that service in person, we've been there quite a few times supporting residents, particularly vulnerable residents who may struggle to engage on their own, quite often go along there to ensure that people are kind of supported through the process and get access to the help they need. We'll know that that facility is not fit for purpose. It's obviously, I'm assuming, was built when the civic officers was built, and not much investment has been put into it ever since. People are working very hard and doing as best job as they can, but I think the physical facilities are letting them down. I mean, and a really obvious example that, again, we have highlighted over the years and is now hopefully going to be addressed, is the fact that when you go in there, you are forced to sit in quite a small waiting area with lots of other people who are quite often going through crisis, one of the most difficult experiences of their lives. They then have to go up to the desk, which is about a metre from where everyone else sits, and explain in detail exactly what's happening to them before they can go into a private room, which aren't very well soundproofed anyway, and explain it all again. So absolutely, we need a new facility there, and hopefully that will address all those issues. I would like to press a little bit more, though, on the homelessness day service, because I remember 2 years ago when we were all told with a fanfare, and I think a few of us went to the opening of it, the current homelessness day service. This was, I think, September 2021, and we were told at that time the council has spent this money on developing this space, investing in this space, and it's the new all singing, all dancing homelessness day service that will continue to serve for many years to come. So I'm curious about why less than 3 years down the line we are now in a position around that service no longer being fit for purpose, and indeed another couple £100 grand draw on council resources to provide an alternative. Now, the cynic in me would say perhaps this is not necessarily about the service, but about its location, and that location has been deemed unfit because local residents, businesses perhaps don't like having lots of rough sleepers and vulnerable people in their area, which ironically, I think was one of the reasons it was moved there in the first place, because I remember election leaflets in 2021 which proclaimed, good news, just before local elections, we've got agreement from the council to move the current homelessness day service from Baffins, where it should never be there, to another part of the city. And funny enough, again this year, I've seen the same thing on leaflets around the Elm Grove area, which say, good news, we've managed to get the homelessness day service moved to another part of the city. Is it just going to keep getting kicked around like political football? I hope not. So again, any kind of reassurance, and I'm sure Councillor Sanders will respond to those points and the content of his leaflets back in 2021, so it will be useful to hear that going forwards. What I will say, almost to contradict that point, but I do think the current homelessness day service isn't a great physical space either, because it was about a tenth of the size of the previous provision. So again, why was that money invested? Why was that decision taken in the first place? Has probably several £100,000, if we're honest, just been wasted? And if so, who is being held to account for that and who is responsible? Keeping on the capital budget, the critical buildings maintenance, we're talking about £2.5 million, and a lot of that is going to be essential repairs works just to keep the lights on, so to speak. Clearly money that needs to be spent, but I think it's also important there that that is done in relation to the alternative work or the kind of complementary work that's also contained within the budget around the asset management strategy, so that we have got a long-term plan around how estates are being managed, and that we're not just pouring money into buildings that are perhaps aren't fit for purpose, that do need to be replaced, and that we're thinking long term about how we can invest in public facilities that will be there for the future generations to come. Moving on from the capital budget, just a few reflections on other parts within here. Clearly, one of the big decisions we're taking today is around the level of council tax. The proposal is for that to be maxed out so that people are paying significant amounts more in council tax next year and in future years than they have been in this year. And we all understand why, because public finances are stretched, the finances of this council are stretched. There are lots of things that we want to be spending money on that the money isn't there for at the moment. So it's understandable to seek that level of increase. However, what I would like to remind people is that lots of people are struggling to pay the council tax levels as they are. If those council tax levels increase, then that financial hardship and suffering will also increase. I think what we do need to go back and do is revisit how we support people who are experiencing financial hardship and may fall into arrears with their council tax. Councillors may remember that we brought a motion to this chamber last year, and I think we tried to bring it about 3 or 4 times before, on that topic, asking for Cabinet to take some really concrete actions to ensure that the way in which supporting people, we are supporting people who fall into financial arrears with their council tax and other council debts is being done in best practice in the industry, and in particular with regards to how those debts are being managed and passed out to third-party bailiffs for collection. We know and we continue to hear stories of people who are being harassed, there's no other way to put it, by bailiffs acting on behalf of this local authority and when they are already struggling to get by. I think no one will oppose millionaires or people who've got plenty of money in the bank who are choosing not to pay their council tax. Absolutely, throw the book at them, chase them down, ensure that they are being held to account. But there are lots and lots of people, lots of them live in our area, lots of them live in other parts of the city, who just can't afford to pay and are still being harangued by people knocking on the door. Every time there's a knock on the door, it's an extra charge on their bill, and they're just spiralling and spiralling out of control. So I still think this is an issue that needs to be addressed. I don't know if there has been any update, any action taken on that council motion since it was submitted to full council and passed last year. But again, any update would be gratefully received, whether here today or outside of this meeting. In terms of social care funding, clearly that's one of the most significant parts of the budget today, an uprate in the budgets for both adults and children's social care to try and address the issues that are being seen across the country, as well as in Portsmouth, with regards to overspend and increased pressure on those services, and the need to meet those needs of vulnerable people. We're absolutely supportive of doing everything we can to try and ensure those services are fairly funded and financed in a sustainable long-term way. Also worth noting, again, a topic that has been before this council chamber many times, the topic of the living wage, particularly of relevance to social care, because the big chunk of people within the council supply chain who don't receive the real living wage are people that are working in adult social care services. They might not be working directly for this local authority, they're quite often working for small businesses, sometimes small charities, who are they're struggling to get by. They're doing some of the most important work in this city, supporting the most vulnerable people, trying to enable people to still live independently, often in their own homes, but also sometimes in residential care settings. But they're not even receiving the very basic of what has been defined as a real living wage. So again, something to consider, something always to keep at the forefront of our minds when we're talking about council finances, that we do need to think about how people are being paid, about the conditions they're being asked to work in, and that we get a fair deal for working people, particularly those who are providing really important public services. Just before I conclude, just a few reflections on the indicative budget savings. I think that clearly there's some stuff in there that is going to have very little direct impact on public services and the people that receive them, things like contract negotiations, other kind of routine efficiencies to be welcomed. But I do think it's worth noting that that isn't everything that's contained within the indicative budget savings. There are some which I wouldn't describe as kind of free hits, if you like, something that's a couple of things which are going to directly impact on people. There's a line in here for the removal of a vacant independent reviewing officer post. Now, my understanding of that role is it's people who will go out independent from local authority and review placements of vulnerable young people who have been placed in care or foster placements to ensure that they're safe and that their needs are being met. So clearly, there's a question there around whether removing those positions is going to ensure that those services can still be provided in a safe way. And also putting up adult social care fees for clients in residential placements. That again is going to have a knock-on impact on people's finances, people who are often already struggling to meet the fees within their service. The relevant cabinet member is shaking his head, so perhaps he thinks it won't have an impact on people, so it'd be useful to hear that explanation. But again, something that's worth drawing out from the budget papers. Looking forward to the future of council finances, I hope there's a time that we can all sit here and we're not talking about savings, we're not talking about how cash-strapped the local authority is, because there's a fair financial settlement from government which allows local authorities to meet the needs of its residents. And hopefully, if we're optimistic about things, that national policy picture could change in a not too distant future. I'm sorry to talk about a general election, George, but there is likely to be one fairly soon, and it will have an impact on us. Even if we want to focus on our local issues, you can't extract ourselves completely from the national policy picture. I guess the question is, what will that national policy picture be? I mean, I certainly hope it will be better. I don't think it could be much worse at all from my perspective. But how will it be better is my question, I guess. I haven't seen much in terms of detail in terms of local government finances. I don't think there is much at the moment. And indeed, a lot of the mood music is that there is no money to spread round. I think there is money out there. It's in certain people's pockets and in certain people's properties, and actually if we tax that, maybe we could put a little bit more into local government finances, amongst other things. But then maybe that's a message for Keir Starmer that some people can relay back, probably outside of our remit. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, full council, for your time, and yeah, I look forward to the rest of the debate.